Now we want to move to Gaza and other issues concerning the occupied territories of Palestine. A lot going on there, although, of course, a lot of the U.S. mainstream media has dropped it down. Doesn't mean that things are not still happening. We are very, very honored to be joining the show to talk about a lot of these different things and many more than what I've mentioned, I'm sure, by Muhammad Shehada, who's a Palestinian writer and analyst. Muhammad, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to be back.
Well, great to have you with us here on the show. I wanted to start with something that Rania mentioned, which is sort of the ceasefire in air quotes. And I mean, obviously, we're seeing Israel is continuing with, various forms of killing in all of the different ways. But another thing I want to also ask you about is this division of the Gaza Strip, which has become, de facto, but seeming de jure, the so-called yellow line. I mean, it seems that part of what's happening here is that in the midst of this transitional period, there's an attempt to majorly partition Gaza and have Israel control large parts of it as well. So just wondering your thoughts about how things are developing here in the wake of the official ceasefire declaration.
Absolutely. So the way this ceasefire came into place, it was just complete and total fraud. I've looked into the record of Arab mediators that have been meeting with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and the Arab heads of states, the leaders of those governments, are saying very explicitly that it was all about the Nobel Peace Prize, nothing more, literally. So one Arab mediator is saying, quote, Trump wanted the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't care about the price of getting it. He wanted it before Friday because of the nomination. Steve Witkoff was panicking, desperate to get it before the deadline, convinced that he can go to Trump and say, I brought you the Nobel Peace Prize. So that was all of it. The only reason that the ceasefire was sustained despite Trump not getting the prize that he wanted so badly is because of the positive media attention that he's been getting for this. He's been showered by love and praise by the entire mainstream media, left and right, and he wants to sustain this. And it's all up in the air. Trump literally holds a green button that he can just push at any moment and let Netanyahu get loose again in Gaza with the genocide. In the meanwhile, what you see with Israel is Trump holding Netanyahu with a leash around the neck, but it's a very loose one. So it allows Netanyahu to do whatever he wants in Gaza as long as he does not officially collapse the ceasefire. So you see basically the IDF killing over 250 people during the ceasefire. You see them not allowing food to go in as requested or stipulated in the Trump agreement, not allowing any reconstruction, not opening the Rafah border crossing for people to go in or out, not even allowing tents into Gaza. My phone keeps ringing with messages, desperate pleas from family, colleagues, and loved ones on the ground, just simply asking for a tent, for a place to sleep the night, and Israel is not allowing it. And the two most dangerous elements of that facade of a ceasefire is what you mentioned with the division of Gaza, where you currently have Gaza being cut in two. The IDF is controlling a fully depopulated area that constitutes over 58% of Gaza's area, and it keeps expanding. They keep pushing more and more and squeezing people in Gaza, 2 million people, into an area that is less than 42% of what Gaza used to be, and it keeps shrinking more and more. And it's divided by an invisible yellow line, and that yellow line is deadlier than the Berlin Wall. So if any Gazan want to cross from West Gaza to East Gaza, that's the terminology currently being used, the IDF is authorized to shoot to kill immediately, even if they cross a line that they cannot see with their own eyes. There was a debate in the Israeli government about what do we do when children come in close proximity to that line. And it was a specific question. It was about children with donkeys. And an Israeli minister started yelling immediately, shoot them, shoot to kill. That was Itamar Ben-Gvir. Another Israeli minister, Dudi Salem, he responded saying, who should we shoot first, the donkey or the child? It was that technical, that level of depth in the discussion of murder. And then you have behind that yellow line, the other dangerous idea is Israel gets its way to do whatever it wants there. So they are continuing the genocide in that 58%. What that entails is systematic demolition of every single home that is left there. So I have friends and family that are living in a close proximity to East Gaza, where the IDF is stationed. And they say that the explosions, the sound of bulldozers is nonstop. They hear it all day long. And that destruction is in the very area where Israel is supposed to build now what is called New Rafah. So New Rafah is this Potemkin village. If you've ever read Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, it's exactly the same idea of New Bethlehem. a facade that is supposed to give a pretense of what is not. And the thing about this new Rafah, it's supposed to be a concentration camp in the very south of Gaza on the Egyptian borders, where Israel will pretend that, okay, we are allowing reconstruction there, and they will use it as an excuse to prevent reconstruction in the rest of Gaza, where the actual people are living, where 2.4 million people are squeezed and bombed increasingly. So that's the depravity of it.
Mohammed, thank you for giving the rundown of the fact that there actually isn't a ceasefire in Gaza. It really, I mean, it just takes the meaning out of the word to even be calling it such a thing. But I wanted to ask you about a different aspect of what we're seeing play out, particularly among Israelis right now. And that is the fact that this week, a story that went almost entirely ignored by the mainstream media in the West was that the Israeli soldiers who had gang raped a Palestinian detainee, and it was on video and it was leaked to the media last year, I believe, those soldiers held a press conference declaring, "We will prevail." We have some B-roll up right now of that press conference. They have their faces covered to protect their identities. But in that press conference, they were proudly declaring, "We will prevail." And that's happening as the Netanyahu administration is going after the Israeli military leader, a woman who is actually currently being placed under detention on charges of obstructing the investigation because she had been the one, I believe, who leaked the video. So they're actually going after the person who leaked this video, who's in the Israeli military right now. And it's just incredible. You don't see this covered at all in the media. It's like it's a non-story. So I'm curious if you can give us some background on what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. So since October 7th, even before, it was usually a mark of honor for a Palestinian to have sacrificed and spent time in prison. It was seen as a mark of heroism, that you sacrificed a part of you for the cause, that you were tortured or beaten up or imprisoned by the Israelis. And then Israel realized, okay, how do we create shame instead of this spirit of sacrifice? And they started to resort to sexual violence, to rape. And it's been a systematic, methodical Israeli procedure for decades. But since October 7th, it went completely out of control, to the extent that the United Nations said explicitly in its report in the Independent Commission, part of the UN Human Rights Council, they said that Israel's systematic sexual assault against Palestinians have become a matter of procedure and policy. And it is instructed by the highest level of authority, civilian government and the military. You have cases where Israeli female officers would literally instruct the soldiers before her eyes on how to rape a Palestinian in prison.
Wow.
And those cases were documented in passing. They were buried underneath about 3,000 words in a New York Times article last year. If you look at the article, in the very, very bottom of it, you see a couple of testimonials about a United Nations employee and a nurse and a doctor being raped that way. And it just slipped through. No big fuss was made about it. With this incident, what was different this time is that those soldiers, they raped a Palestinian on camera, and the Palestinian was raped so violently that his intestines exploded. His rectum was ruptured, so he needed to be hospitalized. And Israeli doctors are completely complicit. They would always bury this no matter what. But an Israeli doctor assumed that it was a fellow Palestinian prisoner that raped this victim. And that's the only reason, and I mean this, the only reason why he leaked it, why he reported it officially. So now you had a video footage and a medical report, a detailed medical report. And once that medical report came out, the doctors realized it's our soldiers that did it. So they tried everything to deny it. They said that that prisoner was raping himself. The Palestinian hostage was raping himself. Although every person in that concentration camp, it's called Sdeit Ayman. It's literally a torture camp per the Israeli human rights organization's B'Tselem's description. They called it a torture camp. And in that torture camp, every Palestinian hostage is blindfolded, handcuffed, and bound by the legs 24/7. So they said he raped himself. And then another doctor said, no, he attacked the guards, he attacked the soldiers, and that's why they had to react and restrain him. So they come up with all sorts of arguments to deny that it ever happened. And there you had the Israeli military prosecutor leaking the video. I don't think that it's even her that leaked it. It's someone in the division. But she realized that she was going to leave her position either way, because she came under heavy fire for daring to create a sham investigation against those soldiers. Because the only reason why she opened an investigation against the rapists is because the story got in the media. It was in the public domain already. And she was worried that if she does not open a pretend investigation, the International Criminal Court would intervene, because the ICC is bound by the principle of complementarity, that in states or in countries where the government fails to launch an authentic investigation, the ICC would take over and have a mandate. So she tried to block them by running a sham investigation. As soon as she got into trouble, she took responsibility for the leak and even attempted suicide. She left a suicide note, drove off with her car, and now she's been in detention ever since. Meanwhile, the rapists are still completely at large. None of them have ever been sentenced. None of them is in jail. The victim, his testimony was never taken. You saw overwhelming support from the Israeli public for those 5 rapists. Even the spouses, some of them are married. And I read Israeli newspapers daily, 16 of them, every single one of them, 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the evening. And the spouses of the rapists are defending them on record. They say, our partners were defending the honor of Israel. They were maintaining the legacy of Israel. It's a matter of pride. You had Israeli religious leaders, rabbis, blessing those rapists on TV. You had Israeli national television hosting them. You even had Israeli members of Knesset, like Congress people, storming the military base where those rapists were held to try to break them out. And then you had ministers, and you had members of Knesset, and you had government leaders all coming in support of the rapists. So now, what happened to the victim himself? Israel was extremely cynical about it. They kept holding him hostage indefinitely with the pretext that we need him to stay here in order to give his testimony. He was never charged. He was never put on trial. He's just held hostage indefinitely just to give a testimony that never happened. And then by October this year, as soon as the ceasefire takes place, Israel dumps him into Gaza. And the only reason they set him free is so that he wouldn't be able to give a testimony, so the case would collapse. So in the Israeli media now, they are already saying that this case is collapsing apart. I think today I read in some Israeli newspaper that the case has been frozen against the rapists, pending a decision from the Israeli Supreme Court. And the rape victim is living now in Gaza terrified, fearing for his life. And he understands that at any moment Israel can bomb him. And I've been in like technical debates with fellow journalists, with experts, with human rights defenders on whether or not it would make sense for the victim to come forward and give a testimony. Because if he testifies in front of a camera, it might make it more difficult for Israel to kill him, because he's already given the testimony. But I've heard opinions to the opposite, of people saying if he comes in front of a camera, that would highlight him as a greater target. He would become the next Palestinian journalist, 250 of them that are killed in front of their cameras, so that nobody would bother. There wouldn't be that heavy backlash against Israel. And I'm in this very confused area. How do you deal with this situation? You know that a rape victim is living in fear, in the shadows. The rapists are at large. They're bragging in front of cameras. And you don't know which decision is the one that can save his life. You know that his minutes are numbered.
You know, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else can you really say about that. I mean, obviously, just the ongoing reality of Israeli terrorism day in and day out in many different ways. And obviously, of course, what we've seen over the past couple of years, the international reputation of Israel has, you know, essentially is in tatters at this point. There are some celebrations from Steve Witkoff and others today that a new country is joining the Abraham Accords, Kazakhstan, and, you know, no disrespect to Kazakhstan. But I mean, they already had relations with Israel, so I'm not even 100% sure what this means. But it just sort of feels like a true desperation attempt here to do anything possible to make it seem that Israel is not isolated internationally when clearly they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have Kazakhstan already having had a diplomatic relationship with the Israelis since 1992. So it's over 30 years. And they have embassies, and they have a chamber of commerce, and they have bilateral trade relations. They have it all. And then now they just pretend that there's another country joining the Abraham Accords because Saudi Arabia is saying no, and Indonesia is saying no, and all of those big countries that Witkoff has promised his boss are saying no. And Witkoff's mentality, you have to understand, his mentality is, how do I please Trump? That's the basic function from which he starts his work every day. That's what Arab mediators are saying about him. He basically, like an Arab mediator is saying, quote, those are a bunch of businessmen who think the country is their company and they run it through their offices, not through institutions. And then he says they are impulsive, unaccountable, convinced that intuition and spectacle substitute for policy. They start, they hit a wall, and then they change direction. They don't learn, they just pivot to the next headline. That's the way they function. But with Kazakhstan, what you see there is like this ultimate Borat moment where you have a Kazakhstani Borat, the president there, a dictator, and Israel's own Borat, Netanyahu, or the government. Like every time you hear an Israeli spokesperson speak in front of a camera, he sounds convincingly like a Borat character. I once described the spokesperson, the top spokesperson of the IDF, Daniel Hagari, as a Borat, and I got a message from an Israeli in my DMs saying, you're my enemy. I don't agree with you on anything at all. But this was hilarious. The guy does sound like a Borat. And you have those two Borats now just pretending that there is peace and love. It's just a distraction. Israel is very desperate at this moment because its diplomatic capital has been squandered. It is living in isolation. You're seeing it at the moment with Israeli headlines every day. So a few days ago, there was a resolution in the European Parliament in which they talked about making the visa entry exemption dependent on countries' human rights record. And then there was a panic attack in Israeli media. The headline in Israel Hayom, we're not going to be able to visit Europe because of our human rights record. They understand, like the European Parliament resolution did not mention Israel at all. It's like just someone saying murderers are actually horrible. And then Israelis are like, why are you talking about us? It's the same that you saw with the Superman movie. You saw someone trying to kill a child, and then the Israelis' first instinct was, oh, this movie is about us. This is like looking in a mirror. It's like beyond caricaturial at this stage.
Well, a lot to continue to cover, and we appreciate you joining us and helping us sort through it all, and we'll keep pushing forward. Muhammad Shehada, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.